Quick disclaimer. If you don't notice, I'm bouncing around. You hear a little bit of noise. It's because my truck's getting unloaded. So sorry if it's a little distracting. That's just what's happening. So Steven Crowder finally decided to take the mask off just completely and show you his racist ass. This dude has been hiding behind comedy for a long time, claiming it's just comedy, the things that he does. After this recent video, you be the judge. You tell me, does this dude really do comedy, or is he just a racist piece of trash?
I don't know where you find this many farmers of color, but they did, and $5.2 billion are being allocated exclusively for colored farmers. Farmers of color, roll the tape.
We begin today's show looking at a major provision in President Biden's $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill that aims to address decades of discrimination against Black, Hispanic, Native American, and Asian American farmers who've historically been excluded from government agricultural programs. The American Rescue Plan sets aside $10.4 billion for agriculture support and allocates about half the funds to farmers of color who are, quote, subjected to racial or ethnic prejudice because of their identity as members of a group, unquote. The U.S. Commission on Civil Rights confirmed as long ago as 1965 the U.S. Department of Agriculture discriminated against Black farmers, but little was done to address the problem. 100 years ago?
Yeah, most happy about the new policy, these people. So, yeah. I'm gonna buy a plow, man.
I'm gonna plant that corn.
Go get a John Deere. Barack Obama, mother. I'm the president of plowing that ass. You.
I thought the last thing they would want to do was be farmers. Wasn't that a big problem for hundreds of years?
Yeah. Isn't that why Arsenio Hall called himself the urban man's Johnny Carson?
I think so.
Yeah, I don't know. Are people lining up out in the middle of cornfield, Iowa for new dunks?
How would you prove this, by the way? Like, how would you prove that you've been discriminated against?
You don't have to. You just
I didn't get that loan. Sir, you had no credit. Well, that should not have stopped me from getting the loan.
I planted a Hennessy tree, but it's not growing.
Well, technically, it did grow, but that shit ain't XO.
I put it in the ground.
I planted a VSOP XO tree. I'm getting in some niche esoteric cognac humor, motherfucker.
Don't white people just go to their neighborhoods and build urban farms and ruin their communities? Isn't that what white
how it works?
In Detroit. Turns out the soil content is a high level of meth.
Yeah, crazy.
Wow, I didn't know.
That and teeth.
There's
random teeth littered everywhere.
And by the way,
cocaine in my arugula.
At this point, if you can sit there and really look at that video, and not only that, listen to his cheerleaders in the background. If you can sit there and honestly listen and watch that and say, yeah, he's just doing comedy, who are you fooling but yourself? Because that dude is on some racist shit. I don't give a hell what anybody says. On top of that, I mean, I feel like the whole Good Old Boys Club has come out this week and just decided, hey, we're all going to take the mask off, including some people in government, if you haven't heard yet.
It's got nothing to do with COVID, but let me give you an example of something that really bothers me. In this bill, if you're a farmer, your loan will be forgiven up to 120% of your loan, not 100%, but 120% of your loan if you're socially disadvantaged, if you're African American, some other minority. But if you're white person, if you're a white woman, no forgiveness. That's reparations. What does that got to do with COVID?
Hey, Lindsay, Trump's plan to help farmers, I believe it was in 2019, and it was $8.9 billion, which made up 40% of most farmers' income, went to 99.5% white farmers. I didn't hear you saying a peep about that. Were you, Lindsay? Now, beyond that, here's a couple more gentlemen who decided to take the mask off over the last couple weeks.
I knew those are people that love this country, that truly respect law enforcement, would never do anything to break a law. And so I wasn't concerned. Now, had the tables been turned, and Joe, this got me in trouble. Had the tables been turned and President Trump won the election, and those were tens of thousands of Black Lives Matter and Antifa protesters, I might have been a little concerned.
Then you have the only black Republican senator talking about woke supremacy. What the hell is that even? Woke supremacy. Yeah, I've heard of white supremacy. What the hell is woke supremacy?
Woke supremacy is as bad as white supremacy.
So, I really don't watch a lot of TV, but I do pay attention to the news. Not really all about CNN or any of the other ones, but Don Lemon here kind of sums it up perfectly. I'll let him do it for me.
Do you want to explain who these woke supremacists are? Because I looked really carefully and I didn't. Hang on, before we go to the video. I haven't seen any woke supremacists. I've never seen a woke supremacist lynching anybody. Never saw a woke supremacist denying anybody access to housing or job or education or voting rights. Never saw any woke supremacists enslaving anybody. Never saw any woke supremacists trying to keep people from marrying amongst different races. Come on, Tim Scott. I didn't see any woke supremacists storming the blanking Capitol. Where are the woke supremacists attacking police? Where are the woke supremacists hunting police officers in the halls of the Capitol and beating them with Blue Lives Matter signs with white supremacist insignia on their shirts and carrying white supremacist paraphernalia? Guess who I saw? Guess who police officers were beaten by? Guess who wanted to hang the vice president? White supremacists, Tim Scott! What are you doing? The only black Republican were the woke supremacists carrying the Confederate battle flag in the nation's capital? Tim Scott? Tim! Tim, I have to. I know you don't want me to yell, but this is ridiculous. You are gaslighting people. You are giving people misinformation. What are you doing, brother?
Then you had this gem of a Republican claiming that BLM doesn't care about families, yet the whole purpose of BLM was protesting about their families being killed at the hands of police in cold blood. But don't worry about it. Wait till the end, because there was someone else on the House floor that wasn't going to let him get away with it.
I know the strength that Black Lives Matter had in this last election. I know it's a group that it doesn't like the old-fashioned family. Disturbed that we have another program here in which we're increasing the marriage penalty.
How dare you say that Black Lives Matter, black people do not understand old-fashioned families. Despite some of the issues, some of the things that you have put forward that I've heard out of your mouth in the Oversight Committee, in your own district, we have been able to keep our families alive for over 400 years, and the assault on our families to not have black lives or not even have black families. How dare you say that we are not interested in families in the black community? That is outrageous.
So there you have it. It's been a pretty wild and crazy week for politics and comedy. I don't understand it. Trump's out of office. You think things might calm down a little, but boy, did the pitchforks come out. These guys don't give a shit no more. They're really going for it. I mean, I think across the country, there's been over 200 bills to suppress black voters or voters who have a hard time getting to polls during voting season. Man, they are coming at it full force. So Dems, independents, what are you going to do? Because They are not playing anymore, and it's time to get our shit together. Oh, and one more thing. I didn't really want to make this video super long, but I felt it important. Warnock, in his first speech on the House floor, it was really good. I enjoyed it. I know some people are going to be like, my comment section is going to go crazy. I already know it. And that's okay. But Warnock hit a lot on the head, and it was a good, amazing speech. Enjoy it. I'm going to put it here on the end.
The Senator from Georgia.
Mr. President, before I begin my formal remarks, I want to pause to condemn the hatred and violence that took 8 precious lives last night in metropolitan Atlanta. I grieve with Georgians, with Americans, with people of love all across the world. This unspeakable violence, visited largely upon the Asian community, is one that causes all of us to recommit ourselves to the way of peace, an active peace that prevents these kinds of tragedies from happening in the first place. We pray for these families. Mr. President, I rise here today as a proud American and as one of the newest members of the Senate in awe of the journey that has brought me to these hallowed halls, and with an abiding sense of reverence and gratitude for the faith and sacrifices of ancestors who paved the way. I am a proud son of the great state of Georgia, born and raised in Savannah, a coastal city known for its cobblestone streets and verdant town squares, towering oak trees, centuries old and covered in gray Spanish moss, stretch from one side of the street to the other, bend and beckon the lover of history and horticulture to this city by the sea. I was educated at Morehouse College, and I still serve in the pulpit of the Ebenezer Baptist Church, both in Atlanta, the cradle of the civil rights movement. And so, like those oak trees in Savannah, my roots go down deep, and they stretch wide in the soil of Waycross, Georgia, and Burke County, and Scriven County. In a word, I am Georgia, a living example and embodiment of its history and its hope, of its pain and promise, the brutality and possibility. Mr. President, at the time of my birth, Georgia's 2 senators were Richard B. Russell and Herman E. Talmadge, both arch segregationists and unabashed adversaries of the civil rights movement. After the Supreme Court's landmark Brown versus Board ruling outlawing school segregation, Talmadge warned that blood will run in the streets of Atlanta. Senator Talmadge's father, Eugene Talmadge, former governor of our state, had famously declared, "The South loves the Negro in his place, but his place is at the back door." When once asked how he and his supporters might keep black people away from the polls, he picked up a scrap of paper and wrote a single word on it: pistols. Yet there is something in the American covenant, in its charter documents, and its Jeffersonian ideals that bends toward freedom. And led by a preacher and a patriot named King, Americans of all races stood up. History vindicated the movement that sought to bring us closer to our ideals, to lengthen and strengthen the cords of our democracy. And I now hold the seat, the Senate seat, where Herman E. Talmadge sat. And that's why I love America. I love America because we always have a path to make it better, to build a more perfect union, It is a place where a kid like me who grew up in public housing, first college graduate in my family, can now stand as a United States Senator. I had an older father. He was born in 1917. Serving in the Army during World War II, he was once asked to give up his seat to a young teenager while wearing his soldier's uniform. They said making the world safe for democracy. But he was never bitter. And by the time I came along, he had already seen the arc of change in our country. He maintained his faith in God and in his family and in the American promise, and he passed that faith on to his children. My mother grew up in Waycross, Georgia. You know where that is? It's way across Georgia. And like a lot of black teenagers in the 1950s, she spent her summers picking somebody else's tobacco and somebody else's cotton. But because this is America, the 82-year-old hands that used to pick somebody else's cotton went to the polls in January and picked her youngest son to be a United States Senator. Ours is a land where possibility is born of democracy, a vote, a voice, a chance to help determine the direction of the country and one's own destiny within it. Possibility born of democracy. That's why this past November and January, my mom and other citizens of Georgia grabbed hold of that possibility and turned out in record numbers, 5 million in November, 4.4 million in January, far more than ever in our state's history. Turnout for a typical runoff doubled. And the people of Georgia sent their first African-American senator and first Jewish senator, my brother John Ossoff, to these hallowed halls. But then what happened? Some politicians did not approve of the choice made by the majority of voters in a hard-fought election in which each side got the chance to make its case to the voters. And rather than adjusting their agenda, rather than changing their message, they are busy trying to change the rules. We are witnessing right now a massive and unabashed assault on voting rights unlike anything we've ever seen since the Jim Crow era. This is Jim Crow in new clothes. Since the January election, some 250 voter suppression bills have been introduced by state legislatures all across the country, from Georgia to Arizona, from New Hampshire to Florida, using the big lie of voter fraud as a pretext for voter suppression. The same big lie that led to a violent insurrection on this very Capitol the day after my election. Within 24 hours, we elected Georgia's first African-American Jewish senator, and hours later, the Capitol was assaulted. We see in just a few precious hours the tension very much alive in the soul of America. And the question before all of us at every moment is, what will we do to push us in the right direction? And so politicians driven by that big lie aim to severely limit and in some cases eliminate automatic and same-day voter registration, mail-in and absentee voting, and early voting and weekend voting. They want to make it easier to purge voters from the voting roll altogether. And as a voting rights activist, I've seen up close just how draconian these measures can be. I hail from a state that purged 200,000 voters from the roll one Saturday night in the middle of the night. We know what's happening here. Some people don't want some people to vote. I was honored on a few occasions to stand with our hero and my parishioner, John Lewis. I was his pastor, but I'm clear he was my mentor. On more than one occasion, we boarded buses together after Sunday church services as part of our Souls to the Polls program, encouraging the Ebenezer Church family and communities of faith to participate in the democratic process. Now, just a few months after Congressman Lewis's death, there are those in the Georgia legislature, some who even dared to praise his name, that are now trying to get rid of Sunday Souls to the Polls, making it a crime for people who pray together to get on a bus together in order to vote together. I think that's wrong. Matter of fact, I think that a vote is a kind of prayer for the kind of world we desire for ourselves and for our children. And our prayers are stronger when we pray together. To be sure, we have seen these kinds of voter suppression tactics before. They are a part of a long and shameful history in Georgia and throughout our nation, but refusing to be denied. Georgia citizens and citizens across our country brave the heat and the cold and the rain, some standing in line for 5 hours, 6 hours, 10 hours, just to exercise their constitutional right to vote. Young people, old people, sick people, working people, already underpaid, forced to lose wages to pay a kind of poll tax while standing in line to vote. And how do some politicians respond? Well, they're trying to make it a crime to give people water and a snack as they wait in lines that are obviously being made longer by their draconian actions. Think about that. Think about that. They are the ones making the lines longer through these draconian actions. And then they want to make it a crime to bring grandma some water while she's waiting in a line that they're making longer. Make no mistake, this is democracy in reverse. Rather than voters being able to pick the politicians are trying to cherry pick their voters. I say this cannot stand. And so I rise, Mr. President, because that sacred and noble idea, one person, one vote, is being threatened right now. Politicians in my home state and all across America, in their craven lust for power, have launched a full-fledged assault on voting rights. They are focused on winning at any cost, even the cost of the democracy itself. And I submit that it is the job of each citizen to stand up for the voting rights of every citizen. And it is the job of this body to do all that it can to defend the viability of our democracy. And that's why I am a proud co-sponsor of the For the People Act, which we introduced today. The For the People Act is a major step in the march toward our democratic ideals, making it easier, not harder, for eligible Americans to vote by instituting common sense pro-democracy reforms, like establishing national automatic voter registration for every eligible citizen and allowing all Americans to register to vote online and on Election Day, requiring states to offer at least 2 weeks of early voting, including weekends, in federal elections, keeping Souls to the Polls programs alive, prohibiting states from restricting a person's ability to vote absentee or by mail, and preventing states from purging the voter rolls based solely on unreliable evidence like someone's voting history, something we've seen in Georgia and other states in recent years. And it would end the dominance of big money in our politics and ensure our public servants are there serving the public. Amidst these voter suppression laws and tactics, including partisan and racial gerrymandering, and then a system awash in dark money and the dominance of corporatist interests and politicians who do their bidding, the voices of the American people have been increasingly drowned out and crowded out and squeezed out of their own democracy. We must pass for the people so that the people might have a voice. Your vote is your voice, and your voice is your human dignity. But not only that, we must pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. You know, voting rights used to be a bipartisan issue. The last time the voting rights bill was reauthorized was 2006. George W. Bush was president, and it passed this chamber 98-0. But then in 2013, the Supreme Court rejected the successful formula for supervision and pre-clearance contained in the 1965 Voting Rights Act. They asked Congress to fix it. That was nearly 8 years ago. And the American people are still waiting. Stripped of protections, voters in states with a long history of voter discrimination and voters in many other states have been thrown to the winds. We Americans have noisy and spirited debates about many things, and we should. That's what it means to live in a free country. But access to the ballot ought to be nonpartisan. I submit that there should be 100 votes in this chamber for policies that will make it easier for Americans to make their voices heard in our democracy. Surely, there ought to be at least 60 in this chamber who believe, as I do, that the four most powerful words uttered in a democracy are "the people have spoken." Therefore, we must ensure that all of the people can speak. But if not, we must still pass voting rights. The right to vote is preservative of all other rights. It is not just another issue alongside other issues. It is foundational. It is a reason why any of us has the privilege of standing here in the first place. It is about the covenant we have with one another as an American people, e pluribus unum, out of many one. It, above all else, must be protected. And so let's be clear. I'm not here today to spiral into the procedural argument regarding whether the filibuster in general has merits or has outlived its usefulness. I'm here to say that this issue is bigger than the filibuster. I stand before you saying that this issue, access to voting and preempting politicians' efforts to restrict voting, is so fundamental to our democracy that it is too important to be held hostage by a Senate rule, especially one historically used to restrict expansion of voting rights. It is a contradiction to say we must protect minority rights in the Senate while refusing to protect minority rights in the society. Colleagues, no Senate rule should overrule the integrity of our democracy. And we must find a way to pass voting rights whether we get rid of the filibuster or not. And so as I close, and nobody believes a preacher when he says as I close, let me say that I, as a man of faith, I believe that democracy is the political enactment of a spiritual idea. The sacred worth of all human beings. The notion that we all have within us a spark of the divine and a right to participate in the shaping of our destiny. Reinhold Niebuhr was right. Humanity's capacity for justice makes democracy possible, but humanity's inclination to injustice makes democracy necessary. John Lewis understood that and was beaten on a bridge defending it. Amelia Boynton, like so many women not mentioned nearly enough, was gassed on that same bridge. A white woman named Viola Luiso was killed. Medgar Evers was murdered in his own driveway. Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman, two Jews and an African American standing up for that sacred idea of democracy, also paid the ultimate price. And we in this body would be stopped and stymied by partisan politics, short-term political gain, Senate procedure. I say let's get this done no matter what. I urge my colleagues to pass these two bills, strengthen and lengthen the cords of our democracy, secure our credibility as the premier voice for freedom-loving people and democratic movements all over the world, and win the future for all of our children. Mr. President, I yield the floor.